From the patient files of Dr. William Wickman, director of Hillbrook Insane Asylum. Patient 161, Cassandra Corelli, aka Miss Chuckles. For once, I've actually got a promising patient for you. I've spent 2 months with 161, and in that short time, we've done tremendous progress. With Dr. Quartermain's recent successes with patient 935, this seems to be like a flu going around. Anyway, 161 now realizes what she's done, how wrong it was, and in her own words, how insane it all was. She is in fact greatly ashamed and deeply regretful. She only wishes little Becky can someday forgive her. We'll get to Becky later, of course. As a result of these realizations, 161 wants nothing to do with her nom de plume, Miss Chuckles, or clowns in any capacity for that matter. Yes, and now comes the time when I of course relate to you the tale of Cassandra Corelli, aka Miss Chuckles. For this one, let's go back to the beginning, when Cassandra was but a small child. Cassandra grew up in a poor household on a grimy side of town. Her father disappeared early on. In fact, it wasn't even quite clear just who her father was. It could have been Randy, or George, or Saul, or Hector, or hell, even our very own Sam Santini. Yes, our esteemed resident, Flatface, had at one point also copulated with Cassandra's mother. I would introduce the two, but Flatface is of course currently serving a 1-year sentence in solitary confinement. Anyway, besides being a filthy harlot, Cassie's mother was also a vicious drunk. Gina was her name, a foul woman, unemployed, not seeking work. Financially, she relied on her endless gentleman callers. They would often offer cash, gifts, and of course more booze for Gina. She also received child support for Cassie, probably the only reason she hadn't had her aborted. While Gina enjoyed the checks, she felt the child herself was merely a nuisance. In the way, a distraction. It was when Gina got drunk, which was most of the time, that she displayed her feelings for her daughter. A bruise here, a cigarette burn there, a black eye, a fat lip. It was like she enjoyed torturing her child. I suspect Gina herself must have suffered from some form of mental illness, perhaps borderline personality disorder. Anyway, you would think someone at Cassie's school would take notice and press charges against her vile mother, but not so. Not when half your students show up with battle damage to class and the other half are slinging dope in the hallway. Why bother? Who cares? Like I said, the grimy side of town. The only ray of light during Cassie's childhood was her uncle Joey. Joey was nothing like his twisted sister, a kind, warm-hearted man who loved kids. And no, not in a creepy or indecent way, he was genuinely a kind man. His profession was in fact even that of a performing clown. Yeah, I know, now it just seems even creepier, but seriously, he truly was a nice guy. Joey Corelli was old school. He still believed that clowns were meant to be funny, to entertain children, not be icons of horror. The great Mr. Chuckles, he called himself. He ran his own one-man show and performed at children's birthdays. Mr. Chuckles was pretty hot stuff back in the day, always in demand. Of course, that began to change as the public perception of clowns changed. While kids and adults alike used to laugh at the wacky antics of clowns, they soon found them either creepy or just plain lame. As a result, Mr. Chuckles wasn't quite so sought after anymore. Still, he refused to give up and took the jobs he could find. Once a clown, always a clown, he felt. And a clown is meant to entertain. That is the calling of a clown. Make kids happy. He certainly did that with Cassie. She would shine up whenever he came to visit. Joey would take her away from that awful mother of hers and let her play in his clown workshop. She would play with all of his props and gadgets. Sometimes Cassie would even accompany Mr. Chuckles to a gig, act as his sort of assistant. Unlike most other children, she began to view clowns in the same light as Joey did. Happy, fun characters who brought joy. Because that is exactly what Joey did to her. Whenever it was time to go back home, back to her mother, Cassie would feel a great pit form in her stomach. She would often beg Joey not to take her home, even ask him to adopt her. He certainly considered it. He wasn't blind after all. He had seen the bruises left by his sister. At one point, he actually did call social services and had them visit Cassie and Gina at home. Of course, the grimy side of town lives by its own rules. Over there, it doesn't work the same way it does everywhere else. Social workers didn't just waltz into that neighborhood and take kids away with them, especially not a kid who supplied her mother with checks. Gina had one of her boyfriends come over, and let's just say he convinced the social workers that everything was fine in the Corelli household. After this, Uncle Joey realized how hopeless it was, so he let Cassie stay over at his place more frequently and for longer periods of time. He practically did adopt her, although it wasn't official. The less time she spent at home, the better. Gina didn't mind either, as long as the checks kept coming, she was happy. Then, one day as Joey dropped Cassie off at home, the two of them discovered Gina dead on the floor, brutally beaten to death. Turned out one of her boyfriends had done it, jealous of all of her other boyfriends. Cassandra wasn't sad, not in the slightest. She was happy. She got even happier when Uncle Joey adopted her, for real this time. Now it was funny clown antics with the great Mr. Chuckles 24/7. Joey finally made her an official part of his act too. Laughy, he dubbed her, his little laugh-in sidekick. And laugh she did during this period, without question the happiest time of her life. Of course, one can't be a clown kid sidekick forever. Eventually came the sad day when Cassandra flew out of the clown's nest and began that epic adventure called life. Except it wasn't so epic. She worked as a barista at a coffee shop for a few years, a job she found incredibly stressful and unfulfilling. She also tried to have a couple of relationships during this time, but the guys always ended up leaving when they discovered her deep emotional scars. Cassie also had trouble making friends for this very reason. She was mighty lonely indeed. At the age of 24 came the day when her sole anchor in life, Uncle Joey, left her as well. Joey Corelli, who had retired Mr. Chuckles a while back, passed away from an illness he'd been struggling with for years. To say that Cassandra was devastated would be an understatement. She took a leave from the coffee shop, and in fact never did return. A few weeks after the funeral, Cassie got an idea. It made so much sense, and there was nothing else she really wanted to do. In honor of her great Uncle Joey, she would revive his Mr. Chuckles act. Bring it back from retirement and take it to new levels of glory. It's what Joey would have wanted too, she figured. Keep the kids happy and laughing. And like he always used to say, once a clown, always a clown. And that is exactly what Cassie was. She figured that's why she had been so unhappy and maladjusted. She had been ignoring her calling. It was settled then. Cassandra was to be a clown once again, and Mr. Chuckles would make his smash comeback. Of course, this time as Miss Chuckles. Cassie took possession of all of Joey's props and gadgets, checking up in his old workshop. She naturally had to make a new costume for herself though, one that better suited a Miss Chuckles. Of course, by this time frame, clowns had grown even less popular, thanks to movies like the It remake and The Dark Knight. When people pictured clowns, what they saw wasn't Bozo or Emmett Kelly, it was Pennywise and the Joker. And let's not forget those weird clown sightings of 2016, that just added to the fire. Cassandra Corelli didn't care though. In fact, part of this endeavor was to disprove that popular image of creepy clowns. They weren't creepy, they were fun and joyful. That's how she saw them, and she wanted everyone else to see them that way too. Of course, enthusiasm alone isn't always enough. No one wanted to hire Miss Chuckles. She spent most of what meager funds she owned on advertisement, but got no bites. Weeks passed, and just when she was ready to call it quits and declare the whole thing a spectacular failure, she got a call. Some out-of-touch mom actually thought it was a good idea to get a clown for her little daughter's birthday. Cassie was thrilled. The big day then came, Miss Chuckles' grand debut. It was a nice little garden in suburbia, and Cassie found herself standing in front of 12 skeptical little kids. They looked her up and down, raising their eyebrows, not a smile among them. What was this, a stupid clown? Cassie was nervous to say the least, and sweated underneath that white makeup. She hadn't performed since she was a kid, and as far as she could remember, it had never been before a crowd this tough. Still, being a professional, she pressed on and got the show started. First, Cassie opened up with a couple of jokes, PG stuff of course, which elicited 0 laughs from the crowd. Being a professional, she took advantage of this failure. She pulled out her phone, made an embarrassing face, and played the sounds of crickets. This got no responses either, except for a smile from a little girl sitting in the far back. Well, this wasn't good. So far, Miss Chuckles was totally bombing. No matter, the show must go on. Cassie went straight into the classic Mr. Chuckles routine, the one Uncle Joey had taught her all those years ago. First, a couple of balloon animals, a dog and a giraffe. She handed one to the birthday girl and the other to another kid. They looked at them like they were deceased. The one kid even popped his animal. That got a roaring laugh out of the crowd. Cassie wanted to strangle the bastard. Still, the show must go on. You can't let down Uncle Joey. Cassie began the juggle act, juggling 6 different oddly shaped objects, then comically dropping them all on her head one by one. It was a very difficult trick, one she had been practicing ever since childhood essentially. Still, that didn't impress those darn kids. They in fact even booed her and called her that hideous word, lame. Cassie's painted face began to twitch. She almost wanted to take that comically oversized rubber mallet and smash the kids' heads in. How dare they boo Uncle Joey's routine? But then she saw the little girl in the far back, the one who had smiled at her cricket joke. She was suppressing laughter at the juggle act. Cassie now felt encouraged and continued on despite the heavy pushback. She went for the pie in the face, again receiving boos, but the girl in the back laughed. Cassie noticed, no matter how hard the girl tried to hide it from the crowd. She then did the flower routine, smelling a bouquet of pretty flowers, only to get her face sprayed with water. Overwhelming boos, but one girl laughed. So it went on. Cassie went through all the standards, trying a few new things of her own invention as well, only to be booed out by those snot-nosed kids. But that girl in the back, her eyes shining up with joy at Miss Chuckles' goofy antics, well, that made it all worth it. When it was all over, the kids gathered around the birthday girl as she opened up her presents. They then all ate the birthday cake. Cassie looked on as she gathered up her stuff. She noticed how that girl from the back remained distant from the rest. She seemed very shy and didn't speak to anyone. No one spoke to her either. A pale kid she was, with dark brown hair, wearing a simple Daffy Duck t-shirt, while the others were dressed up for the occasion. Cassie decided to approach her. As she walked up to the girl, the meek, melancholy look on her face turned into a slight smile. Cassie pulled out a pink balloon from her oversized clown pants and began to twist and turn, shaping it into an animal, an elephant, one of the trickiest ones to do. She then presented it to the girl, who eagerly grabbed it, her slight smile turning into a broad, toothy one. Cassie said it was for her, then asked her name. Becky, the girl said. Being this close to the girl, she noticed a bruise on her arm. Before she could inquire about it, a woman appeared from the house, one of the moms. While a party was going on, most of the moms had been inside, presumably gossiping or something. This was Becky's mom, Cassie presumed, as she walked up to the two, grabbed Becky by the arm and said, "Let's go." The woman smelled of alcohol. Cassie noticed it immediately. Images of her own mother flashed through her mind. Becky's mom looked like typical white trash, not a very pretty nor stylish woman. She dragged Becky away from the party, saying how she had had enough and it was time to leave. Becky struggled against the grip and said she didn't want to go. Her mom violently yanked at her arm, causing Becky to drop her balloon elephant. The wind caught it and whisked it away. Her mom didn't stop nor care. She shoved Becky into a car parked next to the house and the two were off. Meanwhile, Cassie had looked on and seen the whole thing. No one else had. The other kids were too busy with presents and cake, and the only moms out there with them were too busy with the kids. Cassie fumed on the inside, and underneath that happy makeup hid a furious frown. All she had seen when watching Becky being dragged away was herself and her mom. Now, what Cassandra obviously should have done was to call social services and have them look into it. She'd seen the bruise and how Becky's mom handled her. And this was suburbia, not the grimy side of town. Here the law actually applied. But Cassie wasn't exactly right in her mind. She didn't call social services. Instead, she asked the kids where Becky and her mom lived. The following Monday morning, she drove there in her car, parking a house away on the other side of the street. It was 7 a.m. She sat there in her car, watching the house. 40 minutes later, Becky and her mom appeared at the door. The mom shoved Becky into their car, much like she had done at a party. As they drove away, Cassie followed. Their destination was of course school. Most kids were already inside, as by now it was almost 8. Becky exited the car, and her mom didn't give her as much as a goodbye. She just immediately drove off, probably eager to get back home and sleep another 4 hours, then get up only to fetch the bottle. Just like Cassie's mother. Of course, Cassie's mother usually didn't even bother driving her kid to school. Cassie watched as Becky slowly got inside the building. She kept on watching the entire day, never leaving her spot, except for once, briefly, to get something to eat. At 4 p.m., Becky and her class exited the building. Some kids left together in groups, walking home, while others were picked up by their parents. These parents all seemed like stand-up people, but then Becky's mom came driving up. She was late too. She had let Becky stand there and wait for 20 minutes. By then, all the other kids were gone. Cassie had half considered approaching Becky, picking her up herself. The mom didn't even bother with the door. Becky had to open it herself, despite carrying several books in her arms. Cassie fumed at the sight. As they drove away, Cassandra once again followed. She parked on the same spot outside their house, cutting the engine. She remained there for 5 hours, just staring at the front of that house. No one ever came out, nor did she hear any sounds. Finally, she drove back home. This pattern continued for days. She stalked that little girl, completely neglecting everything else in her life, including work. Not that she had much of a life, nor was there any work. One day, while doing her stalking, Cassandra was able to spot Becky being all by her lonesome. She was on a playground near their house, sitting on a swing. Cassie saw her chance. Before getting out of the car, she surveyed the area, making sure no one was around. From out of the trunk, she pulled out her clown costume. She had had it with her the entire time, just waiting for an opportunity like this. She quickly put it on, including the wig, got back into the car and slapped on some clown makeup, all the while glancing at Becky, making sure she hadn't left. Miss Chuckles then approached Becky. The girl immediately lit up at the sight of the colorful character. Miss Chuckles let out a goofy laugh and saluted the young lady. While Becky was happy to see her, she was also a bit confused and asked what Miss Chuckles was doing there. The clown explained that she had come to see her friend and also return her gift. She had dropped it after all. From out of her oversized pants, she once again pulled out a pink balloon. With the same technique used earlier, Miss Chuckles shaped a piece of rubber into an elephant, then handed it over to the little girl, a broad smile on her painted face. Becky accepted it with glee. Cassie then sat down on a swing next to her. Now this was the real reason she had come here. The two began to talk, and Cassie carefully probed her about her mother, the bruise. In fact, she could now clearly see a new, fresh bruise on Becky's other arm. The girl was reluctant to talk about it at first, but then slowly began to open up. She began to talk about her mother, how she drank all day, got angry with Becky for no reason, and beat her. Hearing it all made Cassie fume. The two sat there and talked for almost an hour, Cassie doing her best to cheer the kid up. It mostly worked too, and Becky got sad when the clown said she had to go. Now, she wanted to stay, but she was getting increasingly nervous that someone would spot them and find the scene alarming. With a hearty chuckle, Miss Chuckles said goodbye to the girl, but promised they would meet soon again. She also said not to worry about her mother. It would all be alright. 2 weeks passed. Cassandra hadn't stalked Becky during these 2 weeks. She'd been busy preparing. While Becky was at school one early afternoon, Cassie went to her house. She could tell her mother was home as a car was in the driveway. She approached the door in full clown getup. Noise could be heard from inside, probably a TV. Cassie rang the doorbell. No one came. She rang the bell again and knocked at the door, all the while glancing around her, worried someone would see her. After 2 minutes had passed, Becky's mother finally dragged her ass off the couch and answered the door. She was a sorry sight indeed. Her hair was unkempt, and she was wearing nothing but a tank top and panties. Naturally, she reeked of booze. All Cassie could see was her own mother. The drunken woman had a tired and annoyed look on her face. When she realized it was a clown coming to her door, the look turned into annoyed bewilderment. "What the hell is this?" she simply said. Cassie smiled. From behind her back, she pulled a bouquet of flowers and held it before the mother's face. "Smell the pretty flowers," she said with a grin. All the woman could muster was a, "Huh?" before the flowers exploded into a shower of rainbow-colored petals, like confetti. The mother's head exploded too, her blood mixing with the raining flower petals. Her body fell limply to the floor. Cassie quickly got inside, closing the door behind her. She now revealed a silenced .45 hidden inside a bouquet, its barrel still smoking. She had bought it at a pawn shop, the gun for $20 and the silencer for $50. She tucked it into her pants and discarded the remains of the bouquet. She dragged the mother's body away from the door and hid it behind the couch, making sure it wasn't visible from any of the windows. The floor was covered in flower petals and brain matter. That needed to be taken care of too. Not a problem though, school wouldn't be over for hours. She had plenty of time. After cleaning most of it up, at least the stains she could see from the windows, she left the house. Cassie drove towards Becky's school, but stopped a block away. She waited there for the remainder of the time, staying an extra 20 minutes. Then drove up to the school. Just as she had expected, Becky was standing there all by herself, waiting for her mother to come pick her up. Everyone else was gone. Of course, her mother never did come. Instead, Miss Chuckles pulled over and waved at her with a big smile on her face. "Becky," she called out, "come here." Becky was happy to see her friend, but still, she couldn't go with her. She had to wait for her mother. She would be awfully cross if Becky wasn't there. "No worries," Miss Chuckles called out. She'd talked to Becky's mom. She had asked if Becky could go with her instead and play for a few hours. Her mother had said it was all right. Becky couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her mom allowing this. Still, if Miss Chuckles said it was so, then it must have been true. Miss Chuckles was nice, the only one who was nice to her. She wouldn't lie. So, Becky got into the car with the clown. Cassie took the girl to her workshop, Uncle Joey's old workshop. It was there she had all of her goofy toys, balloons, rubber mallets, rubber chickens, juggling balls, water-spraying flowers, and so on. Besides these common clown accessories, Cassie had lately been busy adding to the workshop. A traveling carnival that had recently gone defunct following a few macabre tragedies had sold off all of their equipment. Cassie had purchased some of it, including a cotton candy machine, a whack-a-mole machine, and a few individual mirrors from a funhouse of mirrors. She had used these mirrors to construct her own mini hall of mirrors. The clown workshop now more resembled a makeshift fairground. Cassie had spent her last money on setting all of this up. This is what she had been busy doing the last 2 weeks, among other things. Becky marveled at it all. It was like a wonderland. She had never seen anything quite like it in her life. Typical fairground music looped on speakers, further setting the mood. The little girl jumped up and down, not even sure where to begin. She ran from place to place. The whack-a-mole machine, the hall of mirrors, a big pile of stuffed animals, Miss Chuckles' gag corner filled with joke gimmicks, her wig collection, the cotton candy machine. Miss Chuckles fixed the both of them up with a cone each. Eventually, Becky got so tired out she had to take a break. Cassie took this opportunity to perform for her, going through all the routines Becky had found so funny at the birthday party. She also added a few new stunts, like riding on a unicycle while balancing a bowling pin on her big red nose. It was a stunt that lasted for about 3 seconds, until Cassie comically fell over and landed on a pile of stuffed animals. After this show, Cassie revealed that she has something special to show Becky, a big surprise. This was also what she had been working on the last 2 weeks. She disappeared behind a curtain and returned with something behind her back. Becky ran up to her, eager to know what it was, circling around her, trying to catch a glimpse of it. Cassie kept turning though, hiding it from view, until she finally whipped it out, exclaiming, "Ta-da!" It was a tiny clown costume. Similar to Cassie's own, but different colors and of course much smaller. It was Becky's, she explained. She had made it for her. Becky's very own clown costume. The girl snatched it from her fingers and eagerly began to put it on. It fit pretty nicely, not perfectly, but pretty nicely. And this was despite the fact Cassie hadn't had Becky's measurements. A clown costume doesn't really need to fit perfectly though, it's kind of the point that it doesn't. Becky thanked Cassie ever so deeply, and then the two went to the makeup station to complete Becky's transformation. The girl sat down before the mirror and Cassie began to paint her face. As she did, she related the story of Mr. Chuckles, her Uncle Joey, and how she had once been his sidekick, Laffy. Once the makeup was finished, Cassie asked Becky to pick out a wig from the collection. She did, and after putting it on, Cassie presented her before a full-size mirror, giving the girl a full view of her new look. "Now you are Laffy," she said. Becky loved the idea and agreed. She was now Laffy, Miss Chuckles' clown kid sidekick. The two of them would tour the world together, putting on the grandest, funniest and wackiest comedy show of all time. If only Uncle Joey could have seen them, he would have been so proud. Cassie was so happy she almost began to cry. There was no time for that though, she had to get Laffy ready for her acts, show her the ropes, how it's done. She then began to demonstrate just how some of the tricks were pulled off, and allowed Becky try them out for herself as well. It was so much fun and they shared a barrel of laughs whenever Becky failed or succeeded. After 7 hours of goofing off in the workshop, Becky finally declared she was simply too tired to do anything. She wanted to go home. Home? Home? Cassie couldn't understand what she was talking about. There was no going home. She was home. This was her new life. They would soon go on a world tour for Christ's sake. What's the matter with this kid? And in case you were wondering, yes, Cassie had said all of this out loud. Becky's tired but pleased eyes turned wide and scared. She began to stutter before the frightening clown figure, trying to explain that her mother must have been wondering where she was. And she missed her mother. She wanted to go home. Missed her mother? That f***ing miserable drunken bitch? Missed her? This isn't how I was supposed to go, Cassie yelled out. She was supposed to beg me to adopt her. Miss Chuckles' happy face transformed into the furious visage of a pasty demon. Becky suddenly experienced a loss of bladder control. Cassie violently grabbed her arm, right about where the bruise was, and began to drag her towards the House of Mirrors. Becky strained and fought back, kicking and screaming, tears flowing down her face. The angry clown woman just told her to shut up. She then shoved Becky into the House of Mirrors and grabbed a chain and a padlock. She was going to close the fun House of Mirrors shut and lock Becky in there tightly. While Cassie was busy setting up the chain, the girl tried to make a run for it though. However, her comically oversized shoes caused her to slip. Cassie picked her up and tossed her into the mirror house. She then raised her arm, about to slap the girl right in the face, but stopped in mid-air as she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirrors around her. What stood there wasn't Cassandra Corelli or Miss Chuckles. It was a grotesque, distorted clown monster. All Cassie could see was her own mother and Becky's. She slowly began to lower her hand, her entire body shaking. She looked at the terrified girl standing before her. The girl who was so terrified she had peed herself and bawled her eyes out. Cassandra had done this. She was the cause of this. She turned to look at the mirrors again and saw the hideous clown monster. What had she done? She fell to the floor, crying and begging for Becky's forgiveness. What happened next is that Cassandra turned herself and Becky into the authorities. She confessed to it all, including abducting Becky and murdering her mother. However, she soon escaped into a fantasy world. Suddenly, she believed her Uncle Joey was still alive, and she was just a child. Laffy, she called herself, the clown kid sidekick. Of course, I've helped her get through all that. But then again, maybe she would have been happier in her fantasy world. After her mad antics, no one is hiring any birthday clowns anymore. The story made international news. The crazed clown lady who murdered a woman in broad daylight and then kidnapped her daughter. As the story spread in the schoolyards of the world, it got greatly exaggerated too. Soon, Cassie had not only kidnapped Becky, but also molested her. And it wasn't just Becky, it was 5 kids. Then 10. 10 kids she had molested and then murdered. I suppose this is when I say I'm going to pull some dirty trick on patient 161, like forcing her to perform in clown getup or something. You know, I could do that, but frankly we need the space, and 161 needs to be shipped off the Blackburn Penitentiary ASAP. Besides, what could I possibly do to torture her that's any worse than what she's already done to herself?